I'm Julia. Welcome to my YouTube channel, NB Library, and I've seen everyone else post these. I was gonna wait until the actual end of the year, but based on everything that I've got lined up to read in the next 2 days or so, I don't think I'm going to have a favorite book of the year. I did actually just finish a book a few hours ago that made it onto this list, so I am glad that I waited until I finished that one. As the year goes on, I do start to compile what my favorite is. I keep track of what my favorite books of the month are, and then as I start to feel strongly, I probably started this list like April or May, I want to say. I don't really know what the books are gonna be or what the favorite books are gonna be until I get further in, although my number one favorite book of the year I did read like January 11th and it has had staying power. Also, I got a ring light for Christmas, like I said I had asked for, so thank you to my mom who got me this ring light. I have 2 more books that I want to finish today, mainly because they're library books and I need to get them read to return them. And then I have a bunch of books that I'm just slated to read in January for various videos. So I am devoting today to catching up on kind of my TBR and finishing out those library books. But that is to say, currently, as of the book that I just finished this morning, I have read 243 books this year, which is my personal best. And you know what? I didn't think that I was going to do stats because I hadn't quite finished the year out, but we'll just do a little asterisk next to these and say these are not all of the books that I read this year, but most of them barring The Door of No Return by Kwame Alexander, which I'm like looking at, and Margin Lands by Arati Kumar Rao, which I'm currently reading. Oh, and then I might finish Kuleana by Sarah Kalani Gu. I don't know, that one's on audio. End up with 246. I don't think I'm gonna make 250 and I didn't want to push myself. My goal was 220. I've passed that, luckily. I have a lot of stats that I keep track of with this spreadsheet. This is actually an adaptation of a Book Riot spreadsheet that I started using in 2018, and then I've since molded it over the years to my own purposes. Each year, my goal is for, of the books that I read, 33% are by white authors, 33% by Black, and then 33% by Indigenous, Asian Pacific Islander, Latine, and Middle Eastern authors. So this year, 32.51% of the books that I read were by Black authors, 30.04% were written by white authors, and 36.21% were read by Indigenous and other POC authors. I also keep track of whether the author or the main character were queer. The author is a little bit like more loosey-goosey. I don't really go searching out to see if the author is queer. I just mark that down if I know that they are. So 32.1% of the books that I read this year were by queer authors, and 36.21% had queer main characters. Of those, 61 books were sapphic or women-loving non-binary characters or authors if it was nonfiction, and 29 were Achillean or men-living non-binary people, and those are main characters or authors if it's nonfiction. And then 17 of them had non-binary or genderqueer main characters. I wish that were more, but I feel like I've already read a lot of the popular ones or a lot of the fantasy ones. So maybe more next year. Oh, and then just a little thing I also noticed is 4 of the books that I read had poly relationships. My average star rating of the year was 3.6. I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but I don't want to do the calculus to find out. For a while on the story graph, it said that there were like a good 30 that I hadn't rated, and the average rating was 3.59. I went in and rated all of those, and then it was still 3.59, so I don't know if it just worked out like that, and my rating stayed really true even after I rated all of those, or if there's some kind of like glitch and it'll update in a few days. I really don't know. Although I think that it did bump up to 3.6 because I had a 5-star read this morning. I have 21 favorites, and then I also like to do little book Oscars. Just usually they've been for myself, but I'll reveal a few of them here where I say like favorite character, book where I cried the most, favorite relationship. So I'll intersperse those in between. I'll also note that these are not organized by star rating. These are just organized by pure enjoyment and how I feel about them, sometimes almost exactly a year after I read them. First, actually, I wanted to shout out some honorable mentions of books that didn't make it on my favorites for whatever reason, but that I still want to call out. So the first is You Are Here by Ayana Dutt Sharma, which is this is a short story collection by my favorite short story author. Sharma's written a few novellas, but not actually published a novel yet. I cannot wait until they do because I'm sure that I will love it. But this is only an honorable mention because I read every single one of these stories except for 2 before the book was published, because I obsessively follow them, and whenever they publish a story I go and read it. Sometimes I even like buy the magazine issue that the story was published in so that I can read it. So they were 3 stories original to this collection that I hadn't read yet. So this collection did get 5 stars and I do highly recommend it, but because it's practically a reread, I just couldn't put it on this list, I felt like. Also an honorable mention is Rain Rising by Courtney Comrie, which will also win a book Oscar that I'll mention later. And I really liked this book. It just didn't quite make it onto my favorites. This is a book in verse about a girl who's she is Black, she has depression, this is a middle grade book, and her brother is very beat up by some racist white frat boys at a party, and he survives, but there's all of this emotional fallout in their family, and she is able to heal a lot and get outside of her shell a lot through group therapy and dance. And then the 4th and long-awaited 4th Morgan Crow book, Silverborn: The Mystery of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. I sometimes find it really hard to rate later books in a series where, like, I know that I liked them, but I can't really, like, talk about them outside of the broader series. I can compare them to the other books in the series, but I have this mental block where it's really hard for me to compare it to other books that I've read. But sometimes I can, I don't know. But I did want to shout this book out because I loved it. I've been waiting for it for 4.5 years, and I had it shipped to me early because it was published in the UK like a month and a half before it was published in the US. So I got to read it early. I would have like frothed at the mouth and died had I not been able to do that, if everyone else was reading it and I wasn't. I remember talking about this series like when I was making videos still in 2020, and then the 4th book has finally come out. I hope it's not that long until the 5th one. But I know that Jessica Townsend was really struggling with long COVID. There's also a murder mystery in this book, so I think that she had to rewrite it a few times to kind of figure out how to write a mystery because she hadn't done that before. This is a fantasy series about a girl named Morgan Crow who is whisked away to this magical world called Nevermore. It's not exactly like she's from our world and goes to this magical one. It's a little bit more like the realms are a little bit more linked than that. She's like also from a magical realm, but then gets taken to this like hidden, even more magical realm called Nevermore, and her sort of like mentor father figure is this man named Jupiter North. He owns a hotel along with doing like 11 other pursuits and important works in the city, and she learns over the course of the series that she has these magical powers. She's training on them, and one thing that I love about this series is that she has the like ultimate special power, but she doesn't know how to use it, and in fact it is very dangerous for her to use it, but also to not use it because she might explode if her magic builds up too much without like a release. So the school that she goes to has figured out a system by which she can learn how to use her powers, but she's only unlocked like the first tier, kind of. I think she unlocks the 2nd in this 4th book of all of the facets of her power. So it's not like one book goes by or half a book goes by and she's suddenly mastered all of them. This is a 9-book series and she's like barely scratched the surface of what she can do. As the title, The Mystery of Morgan Crow, might suggest, she does get to learn more about her family, particularly her mother's side of the family in this book. And the most heartbreaking thing happens where she and Jupiter are separated from each other for a lot of the book because Morgan is very angry at Jupiter, and The like central thing that I love in this book series is their relationship, so that was really hard to take. And I won't spoil how it ends, but it's okay by the end. That was much awaited. It was my like most anticipated book of the year, and I just wanted to mention that I read that and I loved it. Let's get into the actual books here. So at number 21 is my top 10% favorite books that I read. Like, well, like 8%. But anyway, number 21 is Symphony of Secrets by Brendan Slocum. I discovered Brendan Slocum with this book, I think in February, early this year, and have since read another one of his books, and then his debut I own and will be reading soon. He's become like one of my favorite authors just with these two. Symphony of Secrets is dual timeline. It is told in the present day by a music scholar, and then back in the 20s by about these two musicians, one of whom is named Frederick Delaney and one of whom is named Josephine. I forget her last name, my apologies. Delaney, or Frederick Delaney, goes on to become like, he's, I think, based a little bit on Ira Gershwin. He's like one of the world's most famous composers within this novel. And Byrne, the main character, benefited as a child greatly from the Delaney Foundation paying for him to learn, I think, violin. He's a young Black man who would not have had that opportunity otherwise, and music has become his life and he's obsessed with it. And the Delaney Foundation asks him to go through these like boxes of records that they found, and you learn over the course of the book that in fact it was this young, probably autistic woman that Delaney took in, Josephine, who is the secret to his success, who is a absolute musical genius, and he took all of the credit. And so you're following Byrne, learning that and figuring that out, with also this like thriller plotline is going on, and his friend Ebony is helping him out, and then seeing in the 20s the relationship between Freddie Delaney and Josephine develop. And I don't want to spoil anything. I was about to say something that was kind of a spoiler, but this was just like, truly could not put the book down, kept like reading in that really compulsive like thriller way. But also I love jazz age, like Roaring 20s books, and several times while reading this book I just want to like pick up my phone and search for the music being referenced and listen to it, and I couldn't because it wasn't real, it was fictional. But it just made me so invested in the music and the history, and I wanted it to be real so badly. Number 20 is We Deserve Monuments by Jas Hammonds. I also read Thirsty by Jas Hammonds earlier this year and really liked it, but I liked this book slightly more, which is why it's on this list. This is a story about a queer biracial Black woman, Avery, who has to move with her family to rural Georgia to live with her grandmother who's dying from cancer. And there are all kinds of secrets in this small town, family secrets, secrets with her new friend Jade, and Jade, the mystery of Jade's murdered mother, and then a romance that she has with her next door neighbor. And this is one of those books that made me cry while I was driving, just because of some stuff that's happened to me that echoed stuff in the book. Like, once one of your parents die, there are certain scenes that it just becomes really hard to watch or read on the page. This was just a really complex book with so many like complex characters, and kind of the questions of like, how do you forgive someone? Can you even forgive someone of something? How can you still like get to know them and understand their pain? Also, there's a scene where her dad, who's white, touches up her undercut by shaving it, and God, I wish that were me. Number 19 is Shark Teeth by Sherry Winston. This book has multiple tropes that I love, or character archetypes, like a parentified child and adoption. This is a middle grade book, contemporary, about a young Black girl whose mother is emotionally abusive and neglectful, and how main character Kita has just been forced to take care of her younger siblings and just forced to be an adult even though she's 12, and she wants so badly to be a kid, but if she slips up, if she doesn't come home, her mom might not be there, her siblings might get hurt or might not have enough to eat. And it's just the story of her relationship with her mom and her siblings, what happens when she's eventually had enough and something bad does happen to her family. I loved the main character. I just wanted to protect her. I wanted good things for her. And I thought the ending was just really wonderful. Number 18 was Mirror Dance by Lois McMaster-Bujold. This is the number book in the Vorkosigan series by Lois McMaster-Bujold, one of my favorite authors. I know I say that a lot, but like, she's in the top 3. Yeah, I think top 3. I don't know that I'll be continuing the Vorkosigan series after this, but this is definitely a book where you could write some like kind of fun books leading up to this one about Miles Vorkosigan, the main character, just doing shenanigans and pulling the rug out from under people, and what happens when things finally catch up with him and there's finally something that he can't come back from. Meanwhile, we learned in the previous book that there's a young clone of Miles who was cloned and raised by his father's enemy, who looks like Miles but is actually a lot younger than him because he was cloned and birthed a few years after Miles was born. And there is a scene in the previous book, Brothers in Arms, where the two of them meet and Miles tells him, hey, in our world, they're in this sci-fi military setting, on our planet, like legally you're my younger brother. You're not just a clone of me, you are my younger brother. And going by the naming conventions on our planets, your name is Mark, because you take our grandfather's first name and our paternal grandfather's middle name, so actually your name is Mark Pierre Vorkosigan. It's not just Miles, it's not just like boy or clone, and you have a mom, and you have a dad, and you have cousins and aunts and uncles, and they would love to meet you, and they would love you. Mark, as we come to know him, and as he comes to call himself finally in this book, doesn't really listen to him, but that seed of doubt has been planted in him, and he goes off, but then this is a dual POV book, and Mark, in fact, is the point of view character for most of this book, where Mark tries something, fucks up very badly, Miles tries to get him out of it, and then something catastrophic happens to Miles, and then we're following Mark for the rest of the book, finally meeting his mom, Cordelia Vorkosigan, one of the greatest female characters of all time, who went on a certain shopping trip, if you know, you know. And meeting his dad, Errol, and his cousin, and then Miles's friends, and slowly coming to like accept himself and accept his place in this family and on this planet and in this society. And then a lot of other stuff happens. But I read this during a 24-hour readathon that I was just doing for myself, where I had a day in April where I didn't have anything to do, and I read this book in one sitting, and I'm so glad that I picked it because it was really a book that I wanted to read in one sitting, where I kept updating, going like, oh my god, the wildest thing just happened, or like, oh my god, Cordelia's finally on page again, because for so many books she was kept from me, but now she's back. And yeah, just a fantastic book. I think that there are some scenes at the end that are very brutal, and I think kind of unnecessarily brutal. There's some sexual assault that happens that I don't think that I think the book could have done without, honestly. But other than that, this is a fantastic book. I don't know that I'm going to be reading the rest of the series. I may someday. Kind of right now I'm putting it on pause. I don't own any of the other books. They're not on my TBR, but I am very glad that I got to this one. And that actually is a perfect segue for one of my book Oscars, which is Best Character Development, as I do these, I'm not going to do as the Oscars do, which is talk about all the runner-ups. But I will say that the winner for this year was Mark from Mirror Dance, who I thought had the best character development of all the books that I read this year. And I think that over the course of Brothers in Arms and Mirror Dance, you see him go from this like bitter, extremely hurt and abused clone to a quite confident and loved young man. Number 17 is a book that I talked about in my Q3 wrap-up, and that is Radiance by Catherynne M. Valente. This is a sort of epistolary novel where it's almost like a found footage novel. We've got scripts, transcripts of audio recordings from meetings, newspaper bulletins, radio shows, ships manifests, diary entries, and this is set in a world that is the solar system as Georges Méliès imagined it, where you can get to the moon in an afternoon, you can get to Saturn in a few months, and they make movies on the moon. I've tried reading other Catherynne Valente books this year, and they haven't really worked for me, but I wanted them to work, and I wanted to like them so bad because I loved this book. It's one that I keep thinking about. There are certain scenes from it that I can't stop thinking about. There's one particular line that gets said that I don't want to spoil because it happens at like a very important climax of the book, but a certain character who's been like so egotistical almost and like assured of herself and this like ingenue is in a very like terrified and vulnerable moment with her boyfriend where you go like, oh shit. I loved this. I've kind of been chasing the whimsy and like sumptuous details of this book and have not quite found it since I read this summer, but this was absolutely wonderful, and I'm glad that I have a copy of it because I will probably reread it. Also, I think this copy's signed. Yes, it is. Very nice. And then I'll take this moment to award the book Oscar for Best Tearjerker to one of my honorable mentions, Rain Rising by Courtney Comrie, where I put the book down and absolutely sobbed. I just broke into tears, and I was dog sitting for my mom's dog, and she came up and comforted me. But it's a really low moment for the character, and then she heals so much with the help of her friends and family. There's a particular moment involving self-harm that was really hard to read, and yeah, like I said, made me cry the most of any book that I've read this year. Number 16 is Mr. Collins in Love by Lee Welch. Have I read Pride and Prejudice? No. Will I after this book? No. But I love this book. It was my favorite romance of the year. Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice is this just really awkward guy, and he is a preacher for the area. And in this book, happening before and then concurrently with the events of Pride and Prejudice, there's an old friend that he knew as a child who comes back into his life and who he hires as a gardener, and the two of them rekindle a relationship that they had kind of established as boys. And it was just the sweetest, fluffiest little ding-dang thing that I read all year. It just had so many sweet moments that made me go, aww, like when you just see a cute little puppy, and just the like wonderful details of like an English countryside summer with the flowers and the bees and the birds and the little like shaded creeks. Fabulous. Yeah, I really loved that one. Number 15 is Before We Were Trans by Kit Hayam. I read this for the Trans Readathon back in March. This delves into so much trans history that I didn't know about and makes the case for a lot of things that you wouldn't expect to be part of trans history to be kind of incorporated into the like canon. And it was just kind of honestly a life-changing book. And also talked a lot about like how intersex history and trans history are not the same thing. And also like we shouldn't really bring up intersex people when we talk about being non-binary because that's not really like our thing to talk about. We should just talk about, you know, being trans and the trans experience. And I thought that the author made a really good argument for that. And also makes a really good argument for like why trans history is important and why like peer-reviewed history that studies trans history is important, because you know, there's that old joke about like, oh, these historians thought that these two were just friends, but this author is like, hey, I get it, like that thing absolutely happens, but also like there are historians that are trans and queer who are doing the work of trans history, and we should acknowledge them. So I highly recommend that if you are at all interested in history, trans people, trans history, or just a well-written nonfiction book. Number 14 is a duology, the second book of which I just finished this morning, which is why it's on this list. But this is The Witch Roads and the Nameless Land by Kate Elliott. This is it's just a solid fantasy duology. It's not tied to anything else. I hope that it has other books later. There's definitely room for them, but it just tells you a good story and world builds a good world in 2 books. And you know what? It was fantastic. I rated the first book 4.5 stars. I rated the second book 5 stars because I finished the book and I was like, there was nothing wrong with that. And I loved it. So that's a 5-star, baby. I talked about The Witch Roads in my quarter 3 wrap up, so I'll be brief here. And then also there's a lot that I can't talk about in book 2. But we're in a world that is a little bit modeled on like ancient China with this kind of empire and this very dense bureaucracy. This land is surrounded by something called the Pall, which is this like fungal fog that no one can pass, and then you have to constantly be on the lookout and rooting out the spore, which will corrupt plants, animals, and even people. Our main character is a woman named Ellen, who is a deputy courier. She does this certain circuit in her area where she walks for a few weeks out of the month, checks on people, delivers messages, and is able to report back to her local leader to let him know if a bridge is washed out, that type of thing. She's a very sunny, positive person. She really puts stock in good boots, but she has a mysterious past that comes back to bite her, especially in the second book. A few years before the events of the book, she had an adoptive sister with a trans son, and that sister was killed in a landslide. So she has been raising her nephew ever since. And at the beginning of this book, a prince unexpectedly comes to their far-flung province, needing to pass through this area that was washed out by the landslide. So he thinks he's going to have to turn around and go a long way around, but the local leader tells him, well, Ellen walks regularly in this area and she knows a way to get through, but you'll just have to go on foot. And so this prince is a very arrogant and unpleasant person, but he takes a lot of his retinue and they start out, but only a few days into their journey, he gets possessed by a spirit, and the spirit is a really cool guy and is just so much nicer than the usual prince. And so everyone starts to like get to like the prince when he's, you know, sort of being puppeted by this spirit, and Ellen and the spirit start to fall in love. And then in book 2, we get a lot more into Ellen and Kem's pasts, especially Ellen's. I don't know that I can really say anything more than that, but it's just so well written, and it takes me back to all of these fantasy books that I loved as a kid, where it's well written, it's going to all of these different locations that are really well sketched out. There's like interesting things going on that are like familiar enough that you feel like, okay, I know kind of how this kind of thing works, and then different enough that it's something that you felt like you haven't read before. I love the main character. Ellen is a candidate for one of my favorite characters of the year. I love the way it's written, and I just have a great time reading them. Number 13 is Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange, which I've talked about at length, so I won't get into it much here, but this is a historical family saga novel, and then part 2 is a like multiple point of view novel from the points of view of all these members of a family in the wake of a tragedy that left one of their family members injured. It also talks a lot about being Indigenous in the modern day, also being Indigenous in the past, dealing with substance abuse, and a motif of gun violence and public massacres. One of honestly one of the best written books I've ever read. A book that made me underline and annotate because there was just so much richness to it. And I'll read whatever Tommy Orange writes next. Number 12 is The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, one of the books that made me the most happy this year. I was just happy while I was reading it. I think I said in my Dimension 20 Read-Alikes vlog, which I read this for, that while I was listening to it on audio, it made me just want to click my heels. This is about a female pirate in the 12th century off the coast of modern-day Yemen, going around the Indian Ocean, reuniting with her crew, and just having fantastical adventures. I'm eagerly awaiting the sequel that comes out in May of next year. This is a great way to talk about my book Oscars for favorite locations or locations that I most like to visit. And although I would have to do a lot to blend in, I would love to visit the 12th century coast of Yemen from this book. All right, number 11, a book that just barely managed to not make the top 10. A book that I actually bumped up quite a few places because I had a little think about it, and, well, I'll just tell you, it's The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman, which I bought and read in Italy. I read a lot of it on trains, which is just so cool. So lucky to be able to do. And I think that the plot of this book could have been tightened up. The characters were some of my favorite characters that I read all year. I will be thinking about them for forever, I think. It just captures the spirit of Arthurian legends so well while updating them for a modern audience, including more women in a more respectful way. Whenever I think about this book, I think about the, backstory chapters of all the characters and how quickly I fell in love with them, where I said this before, but every character that had a chapter that was all about them and explaining who they are and where they came from, I'm like, oh, that's my new favorite character in the book. Oh, I want them to be the main character for the rest of the book. And then repeat that 6 or 7 times. I think Nimue was a real standout for me. I loved her story and I loved just the development of her character. She was almost a favorite character of the year for me. Just one of those books where I can see its flaws while at the same time I really love it, and it is very near and dear to my heart. All right, now we're in the top 10. My 10th favorite book of the year was The Sign of the Dragon by Mary Soon Lee. This is a book that was recommended to me on Reddit, where lots of people chimed in to say, this is not a very well-known book. I suppose, maybe these posts in this year, it got a lot more press. I think it was, re-released or something, but a lot of people were saying, wow, you really have to read this book, and, it's not very well-known, but, it's so good. So this is a book in verse that is a epic Chinese-inspired fantasy. It's this world in which kind of the Chinese-Mongolian kingdom exists kind of alongside with this Celtic kingdom. So you have all these clash between these two cultures. And this is a very long book. It's 500 plus pages and it spans the course of many decades. And so there are characters that are in the first few sections that are very important but are not in the later sections in the book. There are characters that start out as enemies that become good friends, characters that are insignificant that become important. This book gets 2 Oscars, one for favorite character. The main character, Xiao, is my favorite character of the year. I'll tell you why in a second. And then it also gets the Oscar for biggest book hangover because the ending of this book had me so destroyed that I couldn't read anything for 5 days. I finished it on a Monday night, and then the rest of the week, I couldn't pick anything else up. I was bereft. But I love Xiao as a main character, and reading this book and seeing him was so inspiring and kind of life-changing, where he does so much, and he has this ability where he can command horses. That's his only skill, or magical skill, I should say, where he's just not just a horse whisperer, but he can command every horse in his army. And so he becomes kind of unbeatable because this is all mounted combat and he has to really concentrate and it takes a lot out of him, but every horse in the army will be galloping at the same time in perfect formation because he's like kind of controlling or commanding all of them. And we follow just all of these events in the course of his life and all these people that he meets, and he's very much a like Ted Lasso or Paddington Bear character, where no matter what, he is kind and he is good, and that changes everyone that interacts with him, where people they hate him or they doubt him or they look down on him, and he changes all of their minds because he's just so relentlessly good. There have been times since I've read this book where I've thought like, oh, I could like complain right now about something, or oh, you know, I don't need to give this thing my all. And then I think to myself, well, Xiao wouldn't complain, and Xiao would give it his all. And now, of course, there are times where you should rest, and there are times when, you know, you can tell your family like, hey, let's take a break. But sometimes you're just not able to do that, or it's just not going to be helpful. And so I've learned just like, there are times when I just gotta like buckle down and get through it like Xiao would do. Amazing book. The ending will never quite leave me. And also the beginning of this book is like the Goblin Emperor, so if you like that book, you will probably like this one. Number 9 is Homie by Danez Smith. This is a book of poetry by non-binary Black author Danez Smith, and a new favorite poetry book of mine. Not only beautiful language, but beautiful themes of friendship, love for your friends, doing anything for your friends, friends doing anything for you, and how like horrifying and incredible that is. A short book, just a book of poetry, but a book that I was astounded by, that really touched me. Number 8 was If You Still Recognize Me by Cynthia Sue. On the surface, this is a YA contemporary story about two girls falling in love. But somehow, it's one of the best YA contemporary books I've ever read, and it just does that by being just really good at being a book. You know, sometimes like you read a book and you're like, the author didn't know how to end this scene, or like this scene is going on way longer than it needed to and it's getting awkward or self-indulgent. Cynthia Sue is like, I know when to end a scene, and I'll end it perfectly at the right point every single time. More about the plot of this book and kind of why I loved it so much. So, I'm sorry, this is by Cynthia So, not Cynthia Sue. My apologies. The main character, Elsie, her family's from Hong Kong, but she's lived in Britain all over most of her life. It's the summer after her final year of high school. She's going into college soon, and she's in this online fandom for a really small independent comic book. And see, this is one of the things that I just love about this book that is so like authentic, because I've been in a fandom like this where it's a small comic book, there's this juggernaut white male gay ship that everyone ships, but then there are these two sapphic women of color that are a side pairing that Elsie's obsessed with, that she reads like all the fan fiction for, she writes fan fiction for it, and she's made an online friend named Ada who's Black and lives in America who also ships this. And Elsie has a really big crush on Ada and isn't really sure like how to tell her. She's really scared too, and they live across the world from each other, like what could come of it, but she's kind of gearing up to tell Ada about this crush. But meanwhile, an old friend from when they were children, Joan, moves back from Hong Kong to England, and Joan and Elsie reconnect. And Elsie is not only realizing like, wow, I think I have a crush on Joan as well as Ada, she's realizing Joan dresses really androgynously, and that might be something that I want to do as well, where Elsie's identity is really wrapped up in like wearing skirts and dresses and looking very cute and feminine, and realizing over the course of the book that that's something that she has to work really hard to do, because she actually truly wants to dress androgynously. There's also a plotline going on where Ada's white grandmother is from England and was writing these letters to a woman in her life that she had fallen in love with but had gone to America to get married to a man, and Elsie is kind of obsessed with reconnecting the two of them, and then once they're reconnected, she can tell Ada how she feels. And then there's also this plotline going on with her best friend who's Indian, their relationship and how it's going to change when they both go off to college. So just like beautiful mundane stuff. And there's enough plot line where the emotional plot and the emotional arc is really important, but it is also like beautifully woven in with all of these other plot lines. I read Cynthia So's other book, This Feast of a Life, and I felt like it didn't have enough of an actual plot, just an emotional plot, which was really a shame. But I think that this book did that so perfectly. And also, I've referred to Elsie with she, her pronouns because those are the pronouns that she uses in this book. But Elsie and Joan have a cameo in This Feast of a Life. And in that book, Elsie is using they, them pronouns. There's also a plotline with a main character's uncle that they reconnect with who is like gay and married to a man. And the character like did not know that. So I always love a like secret queer relative story. It comes up a lot in YA contemporary, but I do kind of like it every time. Number 7 is Vanya and the Wild Hunt by Sengu Mandana. Sengu Mandana is very well known for The Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping and The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. She also has a YA trilogy that like never gets talked about. I tried reading the first one and it wasn't for me. It was like very early 2010s YA, and that's not really a style that I'm into anymore, that I wasn't ever really quite into. But she's written YA, she's written adult, and I thought that the adult, because I read Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and I thought it was just too like twee, which is not a word that I use very often, but it was just too cutesy for an adult contemporary romance. But that tone is perfect for middle grade. Sengu Mandana is perfect for middle grade. And this is just a fantastic middle grade fantasy book. It's a little bit Morgan Crow coded. Like, I can't guarantee that Sengu Mandana hasn't read all of the Morgan Crow books because there's some parallels, but I love a portal fantasy. God, do I love a portal fantasy. And so in this book, Vanya lives with her parents in a bookshop, and all her life there are these, not every book, but certain books that have talked to her. Like they have personalities, like in The Page Master. She learns at the beginning of this book that both of her parents spent time in this magical secondary world, going to this magical school as children, and that's where they met. But they both decided to come to the real world and stay there and not raise Vanya in that world. But there has been a new threat, the Wild Hunt, and they decide that it is time for Vanya to get introduced to this world. And so she goes and stays with their friend Jasper and his husband, who are teachers at the school, who were her parents' childhood friends. Vanya has ADHD. She has a problem with certain textures and certain sensory things, and so this book talks a lot about that and accommodations for her and how adults and her fellow students can accommodate her. I think it's really easy in middle grade for either the kids don't have a lot of agency or they have too much agency and you're wondering, where are the adults? And there are all these contrived reasons why the adults can't help. But this book so perfectly cleaved right down the middle of those two things, where there are very good reasons why Vanya has to do certain things on her own, or there are certain things that she takes on, not to spoil the end of the book, but also like adults who really want to protect her and love her. But she is so brave. She's such a brave little girl and does all of these things in the book that make you want to go like, oh my gosh, Vanya, no, but also like, she saves people's lives through like things that she chooses to do, which I just think is so wonderful to see in middle grade and just so wonderful to see from a main character, where she's scared but she does things anyway, and she takes things on that she like thinks through and goes, well, I think that this is the right course of action, and I just loved her. I love this world. I was reading this and Nevermore at the same time, and maybe the reason that this one is on the list and the Silverborn is not is that this is a shorter book. It's a more like self-contained. The sequel got pushed back to like March of 2027, where originally it was going to be January 1st, 2027, and that's just really tough for me. I will be eagerly awaiting the second book in the series, Vanya and the Shifting Spire, especially because of a really big thing that happens at the end of this book, which Vanya does because she's a very brave girl. I don't know, maybe I just truly liked this one more than Silverborn. I don't know. I really couldn't say. Oh, the heat did come on, because even though I turned it down, it's gotten cold enough that it turned itself on. So just sorry about the noise. I am cold. Number 6 was Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes. This book is so hysterically funny while also being just very relatable. Like, very relatable to my high school experience, while also this main character having to go through so much that I did not. The main character, Yamilet, at the beginning of this book, starting to go to a Catholic high school. Her brother, Cesar, is also going there, and it's kind of a thing where Cesar can no longer go to their public high school because he was being bullied and getting into fights, and so Yamilet, as a older sister, has always been expected to sacrifice for and protect Cesar. And so, although she doesn't exactly want to, and she knows that their mom can't really afford it, they're both going to this Catholic high school together so that she can keep an eye on Cesar. Knows that she's a lesbian, but is like really trying to keep it tamped down because she doesn't think her mom will accept her. Also, about 5 or 6 years before the start of the book, their dad was deported to Mexico, so he's living in an apartment by himself in Mexico, and they're still in contact with him but just haven't seen him in a long time. Yamilet falls in love with the only other out person at school, a adopted Chinese American girl named Bo. I won't get into it too much, but I fell in love with Bo in a way that, like, one, I mean, she's a teenager, so I can't actually like be in love with her. I don't often like fall in love with a love interest like the main character does, but like I said, this book reminded me a lot of my high school experience in a way that I won't get into, but Bo did remind me of a certain someone that I have fallen out of contact with. I read the sequel, I think I talked about it in October, my October wrap-up, which is Cesar's story and told from his point of view. It is a lot more of a downer and less funny than Lesbiana's Guide, and also the main character's just making bad choices, and that's always hard to see. I thought this book was just great, and I highly recommend it. I've read also Sonora Reyes' other YA book, the Oscar Ortega's Survival Club or Revenge Club, something like that, and was kind of disappointed by it. So I don't know if I'll like the author's other writing. Sometimes there's just like one book by an author that really works for you, and maybe this was the book for me, and that's why it's in my top 6. All right, getting into the top 5, kind of tied because they're books by the same author that I enjoyed almost equally, was Underland and Is a River Alive by Robert Macfarlane. With the exception of one book, I've now read nearly everything by Robert Macfarlane. He has a few other like little picture books or like very short books that I haven't read and probably won't, but this is just really wonderful nature writing, like nature and science writing, and the first one that I read was Underland. These are also both signed because I got to meet him, which is really awesome. The thing that I really love about these books and why these two are my favorites of his is that he's not just writing about nature, he's writing about people, and particularly like people that he comes to know and love that he's met. And he just, the way that he writes about people and like getting to meet him, he just seems like such a kind, lovely person, where he just has no trace of toxic masculinity whatsoever, and just seems to like really love the people and causes around him. So Underland, kind of each chapter goes into kind of a different location, and it's a little bit of travel writing as well, so is A River Alive. But he's talking about humanity's relationship with the underground, like caves, or the underground of the ocean, or like the Paris catacombs. God, that chapter was so cool. But also like geology, history, climate change, and how all of those things relate to caves and the underground. Just so fascinating, so beautifully written. I adore his writing style. It's absolutely gorgeous, which is one of the things that keeps me coming back to him, because it's not only the subject matter, it's the way that he turns it into pure poetry. And then Is a River Alive is answering its own question kind of in the preface, which is yes, obviously, but also following 3 different rivers and the fate of them, and also several different people that take him on this journey, or that he brings along with him, and kind of like his relationship to them. So we've got a river in Ecuador, India, and Canada, and also talking a lot about Indigenous rights in this book, and how Indigenous people are really water protectors, and really at the forefront of this like rights of rivers movement, and recognizing rivers as living beings. And so referring to, not saying like there's a river that flows downstream, you say there is a river who flows downstream. And at the author event that I got to go to, there was a Q&A, and I asked him, in your writing, and especially in this book, I've noticed that you talk about people as much as you talk about writing, and kind of what's your process for combining those two things. And I wish I'd written down exactly what he said, but he said something along the lines of like, the best definition that I have come up with for a river is a like collection of beings moving through the world, and that's what people are. And so he is thinking of people and rivers as one and the same, you know, seeing the parallels between them. It was beautiful, and I loved it, and this was an expensive hard copy, but I'm glad that I bought it so that I could read it before meeting him and get it signed by him. Here, before we get into the top 4, I'll shout out the book that was the most gender euphoric for me. I had a few different options for this one, but ultimately I went with What Stalks the Deep by Tegan Kingfisher, which is the 3rd Sworn Soldier series, the 3rd book starring Alex Easton. And in all of these books, it's just a non-binary protagonist getting into trouble and getting out of it. And I feel there, I feel seen and included, and I don't usually imagine myself in books. That's not really why I read, except for I could never be as witty as Alex Easton is, nor do I have the same background as Ka, but whenever something happens to Ka and Khan is in a sticky situation, I'm like, oh, I'm there, I'm Alex. So that is very gender euphoric for me. I also forgot, my favorite couple of the year was absolutely Bo and Yamilet from the Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School. They're in the Golden Boy's Guide to Bipolar, the sequel, a little bit, and it's just like, oh, getting to see them together as a couple and doing couple things is like, yes, children, I'm so happy for you. And there were a lot of good contenders this year, so the fact that they made it really shows how much I love that couple in that book. All right, number 4, you've probably been able to see it off screen here. A book that I will not shut up about, that I keep recommending to people, was The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. I'm sure you'll hear a lot about this book this year, and can I just say that I was interested in this book before it came out, before it was getting buzz, before I saw any glowing reviews of it. Memorial Day weekend, here at the end of May, I had put in an order at the bookstore on Whidbey Island that we like to go to, and I said, hey, can you put this in? I'll come pick it up Memorial Day weekend. And then I was at work, and I had my mom go and get it for me so that I had it all ready to go when I arrived on Whidbey. I just had a really good feeling about it. It was almost like eerie, like a premonition, where I was like, I think this is going to be one of my favorite fantasy books of the year, before I'd even cracked it open. And I was lying on the beach on a beautiful day. It was so sunny. I got sunburned because I didn't put sunscreen on the backs of my knees. And my mom was like, hey, let's go on a walk down the beach. And we're walking, and all I can think about is the mystery of this book. And I'm just thinking, like, well, if this was this and this person was here, then who is redacted? You maybe have already heard a lot about this book by now. This book is many things. It's the first in a series. It is a games/trials book, which I usually avoid like the plague. It is a murder mystery. It's an epic fantasy. It's a world where people self-sort into 8 animal groups in a way that is not cheesy at all. I won't tell you why, but it wins the book Oscar for having the best twists of any book that I've read this year. God, every single thing that you learn in like the first half of the book, you're like, oh wait, that's wrong because da-da-da-da-da, and that's a lie because this person did this and that, and then culminating in this one twist that made me go, what the fuck? Someday, maybe, I don't know, 10 years from now, The Fox and Winter will come out, and I will be so excited to read it. Also, there's a character who is like the main character for the first like 4 chapters, and then she goes away and you're like, wait, but what happened to her though? But what happened to her though? But wait a second, is she... And then we do a protagonist switcheroo and we get to our real protagonist, Nima Craw. I'm sorry, I can't talk about this book in a coherent way. I also feel like probably you've heard about this book, and so I don't really want to like go over the synopsis again, but just meticulously plotted, so well character drawn, where like there are 8 contenders who are competing in this book to become the next emperor, and I could probably tell you like at least 5 things about every single person, and when they're all talking on a page, I basically know like who's saying what, because they're that well drawn and we know that much about them. Also, like in The Bright Sword a little bit, there are backstory chapters where like you come to like really hate or really love a character. All of your assumptions are proven to be incorrect. It's also like, God, how many pages is this? Almost 650 pages, and I read it in like 2 days. I just couldn't put it down. It's absolutely fantastic. It deserves all of the buzz it's getting and more, because it was like maybe the best fantasy book that came out this year, and certainly one of my favorite fantasy books this year. I actually can't say my absolute favorite because, well, there are some that are above this. Besides winning the book Oscar for my favorite twist, beating out many really good contenders, that afternoon where I was reading this book on the beach and starting to piece the mystery together was my favorite, like, reading moment of the year. Not just, like, a book that I enjoyed, but I was in a really cool place while I was reading the book, or the just experience of the reading was so special. Number 3 is also a book that I read very early on, and that is The River Has Roots by Amal El-Mohtar. I think about the last line of this book all the time, and it makes me tear up every time. And also this wins my book Oscar for Best Audiobook. I know that the physical book is great because it has illustrations, but the audiobook has sound effects, and also all of the songs in it are sung, or rather there is singing in the background, and the author is playing the instrument that you hear while her sister is singing, and actually one of the songs they sing is a Palestinian folk song. This is a very short, like modern day fairy tale, or rather not set in the modern day, but written in the modern day, kind of in the vein of a T. Kingfisher, or a Premi Muhammad, or The Summer War by Naomi Novik. All great novellas. This one takes the cake and flies above all the rest for me. It's this fairly simple story. It's a world in which these 2 sisters live on their family's land. They're both young adults, and they have an agreement with the fairyland upriver of them on the River Liss, where they will sing to these two willow trees that hang over the river, and in return will kind of get good fortune from the Fae. And then the eldest sister falls in love with a Fae who comes to meet her, who is like non-binary, genderqueer. But there is a local like minor lord who wants their land and who wants the eldest sister's hand in marriage, and he will do anything to get it. It's a story of music and old magic and sisterhood. It's very short, it's probably about 100 pages, and it's simply exquisite. I adored it. It just takes me back to fairy tales that I read when I was a kid, or like the Terry Pratchett witches books, and it was lovely. I can't tell you what the last line is, but because of spoilers, but if you know, you know. If you get to the last line of the book, it just absolutely gets me choked up. And I think I like almost like gasped when I heard it for the first time. It's just so lovely. All right, number 2. These two have jockeyed for first place, number 1 and number 2. Searching My Heart. This is the way that I've ordered them. Number 2, my second favorite book of the year, was Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson. I also talked about this in my quarter 3 wrap up. I read a lot of good books in quarter 3, I suppose. This is the story of a nun in a fantasy world who has been very sheltered, and because of things in her past, is not really good at interacting with people because she never really learned how. But she is training to be a nun. She wants to stay in this nunnery for the rest of her life and just live quietly in peace, but she's unable to do that because her nunnery is attacked and she is forced to take on this revenant spirit, which kind of like possesses her body and gives her all of these abilities while also being very sarcastic and unhappy to be inhabiting her body. It's very reminiscent of Sabriel by Garth Nix, a favorite book of mine. It's got the guy in your head trope, which I absolutely love, and it's just a really fantastic standalone. I almost wish it wasn't a standalone, and I also like ignore the last like paragraph of this book and pretend that it didn't exist, which is fine because the author never wrote the second one, but it works very well as a standalone. And we've got just a main character who never refuses the call, who gets out there and does what she needs to do to help people because she genuinely wants to help people, even though, you know, she'd rather just be safe at home in the nunnery, but she can't do that, so she has to go be the hero that people need. This was another contender for a book that made me cry the most, because it has another trope that I love where there's a desperate push to do something at the end that they need to do, and it might kill the main character, and she's just gritting her teeth and getting through it even though she's in so much pain. This wins the book Oscar for my favorite scene of the year. It's that scene where they're doing the push to the end, and also a scene which is where Artemisia, the main character, is in danger towards the climax of the book. I can't tell you why, but the Revenant has like grown to love her, and the only time in the book, every other time it calls her just like nun or girl, but when it is like defending her from danger, it calls her by her name the only time. And I do really also love the trope where it's like they never call each other by their name, or like they only call each other by their last name, and like the one time they slip up and call them by their first name, and that's how you know they really care about each other. Good stuff. Absolute written for me catnip for Julia specifically. But number 1, my favorite book of the year of 2025, a book that has had the top slot for months and months since I read it in January, is The Maid and the Crocodile by Jordan Ifueko. I found out about this book because I was reading reviews of Heavenly Tyrant by Jiran J. Zhao, and someone said, if you want to read a good book about a revolution that's young adult, that is actually about a revolution and listening to the voices of the people, just go read The Maid and the Crocodile. And I was like, shit, that sounds great. And it was great. So this is set in the same world as Raybearer. I had read Raybearer and not Redemptor, and I got along fine. Like, I think it had helped that I read Ray Bear. It explained a lot of things that happened in Redemptor, and I went back and read Redemptor. Not nearly as good as Maid in the Crocodile, let me tell you. But this is a West African inspired Howl's Moving Castle retelling. And not only is there an incredible romance between the main character, there is also that revolution that is truly centered from the people and is about the voice of the people and what ordinary people want and need, and about like truly giving up the things that are nice and good that other people don't have in order to make the revolution happen. It is about a girl learning to forgive herself and treat herself well, where she just had been unable to do that because of all the things that people told her that she was for most of her life. It is very wonderful, sweet, cozy, whimsical, just magical. There's a moment where Sade and the crocodile, this young man who fulfills the Howl role, have made a picnic together, and they're just like lying in a garden, like looking up at the sky, and I'm like, God, I want to be there. And it was like this sunny day in January where it had been cloudy for so long, and I was out on a walk and it was sunny, and I was listening to this moment, and I was just turning my face up to the sun, like imagining that that was me and I was there, and I could feel, you know, that warm sun. I wouldn't have loved this book so much if it hadn't done so many things well, but it just works. It is so many wonderful things in one book, and that is why it is my favorite book of the year. All right, I did end up talking for a very long time, but I had a lot of books to get through. So that is all of my book Oscars, all of my favorite books of the year. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for watching me this year. If you've been following me for a little bit, or if this is your first video, it's been so nice to be making these videos. It is really a labor of love. I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be talking about books. I really want to champion books that are not talked about, books by marginalized authors, and I want to keep doing that into 2026. So again, thank you. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. For me, I will see you next year. By the time you're watching this, it will be 2026. Thank you. I've been Julia, and this has been NB Library.